My name is Julia, and for as long as I can remember, my life has always been a little tangled with my sister Emma's. We were just a year apart in age, so we grew up more like twins than siblings. People always compared us. Our grades, our looks, even how we laughed. I didn't mind much. I actually enjoyed having a sister so close. I thought we'd always have each other's back no matter what. But Emma, she was different. She always wanted to be first. If I got a new dress, she'd find a way to get something flashier. If I brought home a good grade, she'd spend all night studying just to beat it on the next test. At family gatherings, she loved being the center of attention. Still, I never saw her as competition. She was my sister. I believed love was more important than rivalry. Our childhood had its moments, some sweet, some not so much. I always brushed off her harsh comments or dramatic scenes because I believed deep down she cared. I never wanted to admit that her smiles sometimes felt forced when something good happened to me. I ignored the way she rolled her eyes when people praised me. I told myself it was just normal sibling stuff. Years later, after college, I got a job in a mid-sized firm downtown. I wasn't expecting anything extraordinary. I just wanted a fresh start, some independence, and maybe a little peace. That's when I met Daniel. He wasn't the loudest guy in the room, but there was something warm about him. He had this quiet confidence and the kind of smile that made people feel seen. We worked on a few projects together, and over time, coffee breaks turned into lunch dates, and lunch dates slowly became long phone calls at night. Falling for Daniel felt natural. It was calm, steady, and kind. For the first time in a long while, I felt appreciated for who I was, not for who I was trying to impress. He listened when I spoke, encouraged me, and never once made me feel like I had to fight for his attention. Felt safe. When I introduced Daniel to my family, most of them welcomed him with warm smiles and open arms. My parents liked him, and even my cousins asked if he had a brother. But Emma, she was different. Her hug was quick, her smile was tight, and she barely looked him in the eye. At first I thought maybe she was just surprised. Or maybe she thought I was rushing things. But over the next few weeks her behavior started changing. She stopped replying to my texts quickly. She canceled our usual Sunday brunch plans. When we did talk, she'd make odd remarks like, "He's cute, but you really think he's your type?" Or, "Are you sure he's not too good to be true?" It didn't feel like concern. It felt like something colder, something meaner. I wanted to believe she was just being protective. That maybe she was looking out for me in her own strange way. But something in my gut whispered otherwise. Something told me Emma wasn't just acting distant. He was watching. He was planning. It was a chilly Friday evening when Daniel asked me to take a walk with him. We'd had dinner at our favorite little Italian place, and the streets were quiet just the way I liked them. He held my hand the entire time, telling me stories from his childhood, occasionally making me laugh so hard I had to stop walking. I remember the way the wind played with his hair, the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. We stopped at a small bench near the river, a spot we had stumbled upon during one of our early dates. That's when he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a tiny velvet box, and with a smile that could melt stone, he asked me to marry him. I was stunned, but in the best way. My hands covered my mouth and my eyes welled up. I couldn't even find the words for a second. I just nodded through tears. When I finally whispered yes, he slipped the ring onto my finger and kissed me right there under the streetlight. It wasn't grand or dramatic, but it was perfect. Just us, just love, just real. We waited a week before announcing it to the family. Daniel wanted to tell them together during a casual dinner at my parents' house. Mom made her famous pot roast, Dad was already halfway through a bottle of wine, and the whole table buzzed with laughter and old stories. When Daniel stood up and gently tapped his glass, everyone looked up, curious. Then he reached for my hand and told them we were engaged. Cheers erupted. My mother clapped her hands in delight. Dad stood up and hugged Daniel like a son, and my aunt started crying almost immediately. But then my eyes found Emma. She smiled. That's what made it worse, because the smile didn't reach her eyes. It sat on her lips like something she'd practiced in the mirror. She even raised her glass and said, "Congratulations." But her voice had that edge to it, that coldness I knew too well. I tried not to let it bother me. I told myself she just needed time. But then odd things started happening. A few days after the announcement, I received a strange text from an unknown number that read, "Are you sure he's being honest with you?" I laughed it off at first, thinking maybe it was a prank. But it didn't stop. The messages kept coming, cryptic sentences like, "You deserve better," and "Look closer before it's too late." At first I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't want to stress him out or seem paranoid. But then I noticed small things going missing. A pair of earrings I'd set aside for the engagement party disappeared. A dress I'd picked up from the cleaners was suddenly stained. Cold comments started creeping into conversations, even from people I hadn't seen in a while. Someone I barely knew asked if Daniel had really told me everything about his past. I didn't understand how all of this was happening, but it felt like a web being spun around me. Emma became harder to reach. She claimed she was busy or tired or dealing with things at work. When I did see her, she seemed like she was playing a part. I tried to keep my distance, but the tension was growing too thick to ignore. One night, after another unsettling message popped up on my phone, I finally broke down and told Daniel everything. I expected him to be confused or even a little upset, but instead he just pulled me into his arms and held me. "Don't let anyone ruin this for us," he whispered. "People get jealous, even family. But I love you and I'm not going anywhere." His words calmed me. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But deep down something was shifting, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still coming. The night of our engagement dinner had finally arrived. Daniel had gone all out, reserving a private room at a fancy restaurant with large windows that overlooked the city skyline. The place was beautiful: white tablecloths, crystal chandeliers hanging above, and soft music playing in the background. It was exactly the kind of evening I had imagined, full of warmth and laughter, with everyone I loved in one place to celebrate. Our family was there, of course. Mom, Dad, and all of my cousins, and some of our closest friends, including a few coworkers from the office. Everyone was dressed to the nines and the excitement was palpable. The clinking of glasses and the hum of conversation filled the room. I felt so loved and surrounded by people who cared. Daniel was in his element, making jokes with everyone and keeping the mood light. He looked handsome in his black suit, his eyes sparkling whenever he glanced my way. I couldn't help but feel like the luckiest woman alive. Emma was there too, of course. As always, she dressed better than everyone else. An elegant black dress that hugged her figure perfectly, her hair styled to perfection. She had a glass of wine in her hand, which she held like a queen, her posture perfect and poised. There was no mistaking her presence. It was like the room shifted when she walked in. I had to admit she looked stunning. But there was something about the way she carried herself that night that made me uneasy. Her eyes flicked around the room, calculating, as if she was sizing up every person there. As the dinner progressed, the toasts began. One by one, people stood up to offer their congratulations, share a funny story, or express their happiness for us. My mother, of course, was the first to speak. She had tears in her eyes as she raised her glass to us, telling everyone how proud she was to have Daniel as part of our family. It was heartfelt and beautiful. My father followed, making some humorous remark about how he was glad to see his daughter finally find someone who could keep up with her. Everyone laughed, and I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the love in the room. Daniel's best friend, Mark, gave a touching speech about how he had watched Daniel grow and how happy he was to see him so in love. People clinked their glasses and cheered. But through it all, I could feel Emma's eyes on me, like she was watching everything carefully, weighing every word spoken, every gesture made. Then it was Emma's turn. She stood up slowly, her wine glass still in her hand, and the room fell silent as she cleared her throat. For a moment, I thought maybe she was going to say something heartfelt, something that would ease the tension I had been feeling from her all evening. But instead she smiled, her lips curling just slightly at the corners, and she began. "I'd like to congratulate my sister Julia," she started, her voice sweet but with an edge that I couldn't quite place. "I've watched her grow up, and I've always admired her strength, her dedication, and her ability to make things happen. But of course she's not always had the easiest time finding love. And I guess we all know that she's been through a lot of bad decisions." There was a pause and I felt the air grow thick. My smile faltered just a little, but I quickly recovered, trying to laugh it off as a joke. But Emma's eyes never left mine. She was watching me, every word carefully chosen, and the whole room was waiting for her to continue. "Anyway," Emma continued, her voice almost too sweet, "I'm glad she's finally found someone she can settle down with. Daniel, you're a good guy and you seem to care about her a lot. I just hope that you'll always remember, people can surprise you." She raised her glass, her eyes still locked on me. "To love, loyalty, and surprises." Everyone clinked glasses, but I couldn't help but feel the weight of her words hanging in the air. It wasn't the toast I had expected. It wasn't even the toast I had hoped for. And yet, Emma smiled as though she had just given the most touching speech, her eyes still cold and calculating. The room was quiet for a moment and I could feel all eyes on me. My chest tightened and I glanced at Daniel, who seemed a little taken aback. He was smiling, but I could tell something had shifted. His hand found mine under the table, squeezing it gently, but even his touch couldn't chase away the unease creeping up on me. Emma had made her move. And I had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. The atmosphere in the room shifted in an instant. It was like someone had pressed the pause button on the evening. One moment, everyone was smiling, enjoying their food and drink, and the next, Emma stood up, her wine glass held high, her eyes scanning the room with an almost eerie confidence. She was calm, too calm. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. "I have something to say," she began, her voice smooth but laced with something that sent a chill down my spine. Everyone turned to look at her, and the chatter around the table faded away. All eyes were on her now. I could feel my heart rate increase, but I forced myself to stay composed. I smiled tightly, unsure of what was coming next, but knowing in my gut that something wasn't right. I caught Daniel's eye across the table, but he looked frozen, his fork suspended in midair. His expression was blank, almost too blank, and my stomach churned with dread. Emma took a small sip of her wine, a playful smirk curling on her lips. Then, without missing a beat, she dropped the bombshell. "He was mine first." Gasps erupted from every corner of the room. Forks clattered onto plates and someone coughed loudly, their surprise echoing through the air. The chatter that had filled the room earlier was replaced by an eerie silence, as if everyone was holding their breath. I could feel all eyes on me, waiting for some kind of reaction. My heart raced, but I refused to let my emotions show. I stayed calm, but I was anything but calm inside. Daniel's face went pale. His eyes widened and he looked like he couldn't find the words. His gaze flicked between me and Emma, his lips trembling as if he was trying to process what she had just said. He opened his mouth but then closed it again, the words trapped inside. Emma didn't let the silence linger for long. She leaned forward slightly, her smirk growing as she added, "Ask him about that weekend in Miami." The words hit like a punch to the gut. A murmur spread through the room, whispers darting from one guest to another like wildfire. I could feel the weight of the questions hanging in the air, the curiosity, the judgment. Everyone was looking at me now, and it felt like the walls were closing in. My eyes darted back to Daniel, who was still frozen in place, his face a mix of shock and confusion. I could barely hear the murmurs around the room, my focus narrowing to Emma's smug expression. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to ask Daniel what the hell she was talking about. But all I could do was sit there, holding on to my composure, trying to make sense of what was happening. Emma had done it, she had made her move. And the question hung in the air like a storm cloud, ready to rain down chaos on everything I thought I knew. The room was still buzzing with whispers, but I knew I had to stay calm. My hands felt steady, my voice clear, though my heart was pounding in my chest. I could hear the rapid beating in my ears, but I pushed it aside. Emma's words had shocked everyone, but they hadn't shaken me. No, not at all. In fact, a small part of me had been expecting something like this. I knew Emma too well, and I had been watching, listening, and waiting for the moment when she would show her true colors. So I smiled softly, my lips curving into what I hoped was a confident expression. I could feel Daniel's eyes on me, but I didn't look at him. I didn't want to see the guilt or confusion in his face. Instead, I turned my gaze back to Emma, who was still standing, looking pleased with herself. Her smirk was still there, but it didn't last long. I could already see the tension in her posture. She was waiting for my reaction, for me to crumble. But I wouldn't. "Then I guess you'll love what's on this USB drive," I said, my voice even, unshaken. I could see her face flicker for just a moment. Surprise, then doubt, followed by that same smugness. But I didn't let it get to me. I reached into my purse, pulled out the small USB drive and held it up for everyone to see. It was like I could feel the weight of the moment, like time slowed down as I stepped forward, walking to the projector at the front of the room. The click of the USB drive into the projector was all it took for the room to go completely still. People were no longer whispering. They weren't even breathing. The only sound was the soft whir of the projector starting up. I glanced back at Emma, who had taken a step back, her eyes widening ever so slightly. She must have realized what was happening, but it was too late for her now. The video was already playing. The first image that appeared on the screen was a hotel room, dimly lit, cozy looking, and the camera angle was clearly from someone who had been recording the entire thing. The video zoomed in and there they were. Daniel and Emma. At first it seemed innocent enough, but the closer the camera got, the more it became clear. Emma was leaning in, looking at Daniel with an intensity I'd never seen from her before. She was laughing at something he said, but the way she touched his arm, the way she stared at him, it wasn't casual. It was possessive. I heard a few gasps from the room as the realization set in, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't. I'd been gathering these videos and screenshots for weeks now. I had known something was off. I'd seen the signs. I had my doubts, but now I had proof. The video moved on, and now the screen displayed a series of screenshots from their text messages. Daniel's words stood out clearly on the projector screen. I regret everything. I want to confess to her. Please let me come clean. Another one. I'm sorry, I never should have done this. It's ruining everything. The words stung, but I didn't let myself feel hurt. Not now. I had to stay strong. I kept my focus as the video shifted again. This time it showed Emma. It was a recording of her speaking to someone, her voice low and quiet, but still clearly audible. I'll ruin her engagement. I'll make sure she can't marry him. She doesn't deserve it. I could hear her plotting and I could feel my pulse quicken, but I didn't let the anger show on my face. I simply watched the video, watching as the room went silent in shock. I saw people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Daniel had gone pale. I could see the blood drain from his face as he stared at the screen, unable to look away. The video ended with a slow fade out, leaving the entire room in stunned silence. I stood there for a moment, just taking in the chaos I had unleashed. I didn't need to say a word. The proof was right in front of them. Emma's facade was crumbling and I was the one standing tall. I think that's enough for tonight, I said quietly, looking straight at Emma, my voice a calm whisper in the stillness. The room was eerily quiet. No one knew what to say and the weight of the evidence hung thick in the air. Emma, who had been so confident just moments ago, now looked like a deer caught in headlights. Her face went pale and she opened her mouth trying to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She attempted to shout, to deny everything, but it was no use. The evidence was undeniable and there was no escaping the truth now. Her hands shook as she looked around the room, her eyes darting from one person to another. But no one was on her side. My parents, who had always been so supportive of me, now looked ashamed, their heads down, their eyes avoiding mine. They had always told me to trust Emma, to love her, but now it was clear that everything had been a lie. Some of our friends sat frozen in disbelief, others whispering quietly, clearly unsure of how to process what they had just witnessed. Daniel, still sitting at the table, seemed paralyzed. He reached out towards me, his hand trembling, but I stepped back, my heart hardening with every passing second. I felt nothing but a growing sense of clarity, a quiet resolve. This engagement is over, I said, my voice cold, steady. It wasn't a question, it wasn't up for debate. It was final. The words hung in the air and with a small, deliberate step, I turned and walked away from the table. I could feel all eyes on me, but I didn't care. I didn't look back as I made my way to the exit, my heels clicking sharply against the floor, cutting through the silence that had taken over the room. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit my face and I let out a long breath, feeling lighter than I had in months. To my surprise, the restaurant staff broke into applause, their claps echoing in the quiet night. A few family members who had been quietly supportive followed me out, offering me small words of comfort. But for the first time in a long while, I felt truly free. Weeks passed and the fallout from that dinner was far from over. Emma, who once held herself with such arrogance, was now a shadow of her former self. Her name was dragged through the mud on social media. Screenshots of her messages, the video of her scheming, everything was out there for the world to see. It didn't take long for the workplace gossip to catch up with her, and before she knew it, she lost her job. The same people she once smiled at now looked at her with disdain. She tried to salvage her reputation, but the damage was done. No amount of apologies or explanations could undo what had been revealed. Daniel, on the other hand, sent me endless emails, pouring out his regrets, begging for forgiveness, trying to explain his actions. But I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say to someone who had betrayed me in the worst way possible. His words didn't matter. What mattered was what I had learned from everything. I decided it was time to start fresh, to leave everything behind. I moved to a new city, away from the drama, the memories, the toxic people. I poured my heart into my business, focusing on building something for myself, something that was mine alone. And slowly but surely I watched it grow. I watched myself grow. I wasn't the same person I had been before. I was stronger, more focused, and more determined than ever to succeed. As the months went by, I met someone new, but I took my time. I didn't rush into anything. I needed to heal, to rediscover who I was outside of all the pain and betrayal. The heartbreak had taught me to value my worth, to never settle for less than I deserved. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly at peace with who I was becoming. Sometimes betrayal comes from the ones we least expect, those closest to us. But when the truth is on your side, you don't need to shout, you don't need to beg for justice. All you need to do is press play. My sister thought she broke me, but in the end she actually set me free. Through the pain I found my strength. I learned to trust myself, to value my worth, and to let go of the people who didn't deserve a place in my life. In the end, the betrayal wasn't my end, it was my beginning.